mail-order bride, humiliated for being fat, mountain man, destroyed 30 men, and made her his forever. Step right up and see the Eastern hog I was tricked into buying. Cornelius Vandermeer's voice cracked across the square like a whip. Laughter swelled, cruel and bright, in the high blue air over Silver Creek. Baskets of late apples, kegs, and wagon tongues formed a ring around a single woman on her knees. Rosalind Rose Ashford, dust on her dress, yolk sliding down her cheek, breath caught between shame and shock. She had crossed 2,000 miles on promises written in a neat, masculine hand. A home, a hearth, a life where kindness meant more than prettiness. What she found instead was a crowd drunk on spectacle and a groom who turned her name into a punchline. She could eat a ranch in a week, Cornelius jeered, drawing hoots from hired fists loitering at his back. I ordered a wife, not a sideshow. A turnip struck her shoulder. A lad with straw hair giggled, then flinched when Rose finally lifted her gaze. There was no fury in it, only the devastation of a person who had spent years practicing hope, now watching it shatter in public. You wrote, she managed, voice fraying, that you wanted a good heart. I wrote what kept you moving, Cornelius said, smiling for the crowd. Now move along. 30 men, ranch bruisers, card table bullies, drifters who rented their knuckles by the hour, flexed around him, the human fence that let a coward pretend to be a king. Someone tipped a bucket. Gray water splashed Rose's bodice and pooled in the dust. No one stepped forward. Silver Creek knew what happened to people who inconvenienced its richest citizen. Then the light changed. A shadow slid over the square, big as a barn door. Boots sounded, slow, unhurried, the gait of a man who had never needed to run from anything. Alexander Volkov, Alex to the mountains and to no one else, came through the ring without asking permission. Grizzly hide draped his shoulders. A rifle rode his back like an afterthought. His eyes were winter water, clean, cutting, impossible to misread. He didn't look at Cornelius. He knelt, and the square seemed to tilt toward him. "Are you hurt?" he asked Rose, and the question, simple as bread, undid something inside her. She shook her head because words felt too fragile to trust. Alex shrugged off his coat and settled it over her, a fortress of warmth that smelled of smoke and pine. Then he stood, very tall, very quiet, and at last let his gaze reach Cornelius. "Take your circus elsewhere," he said. "The show is over." The hired men shifted. Cornelius laughed a brittle laugh that did not touch his eyes. Somewhere, a wind bell rang on a porch. Somewhere, a child stopped giggling. And you, where in the world are you listening from right now? Because sometimes a story isn't just a story. It's a hand extended across distance saying, "Hold on." Silver Creek wore prosperity like lacquer. Shiny storefronts, a new telegraph line clicking like a nervous cricket, a hotel veranda with striped awnings and rocking chairs no miner ever sat in. But scratch the polish, and you found the same old pecking order. A banker's promise could outweigh a widow's deed. A bully with a payroll could pass for a gentleman. Cornelius Vandermeer had learned both lessons young and spent a lifetime making everyone else relearn them. He stood now with thumbs hooked in a brocade vest, the picture of civilized success, which is to say, he was surrounded by men willing to do the uncivilized parts for him. "You're trespassing on my business," he told Alex, each syllable poured like cold gravy. Alex didn't answer. He was measuring distances. The sag in the livery roof, where a man might scramble up and fire from a false vantage, the cluster of boys by the pump, eyes bright with the kind of thrill that never grows into honor. The tremor in Rose's hands as she clutched the fur at her throat and tried to become smaller than her body would allow. Rose had practiced smallness most of her life. In Boston kitchens, she learned to skim her laughter to a polite ripple and her appetites to invisibility. But hope is not a small thing, and when Cornelius's letters began, gracious, proper, written on thick paper that smelled faintly of bay rum, she let herself keep the biggest piece. He admired steadiness, he said. He admired thrift. He wanted a wife who would treat a house like a covenant, not a stage. When she wrote back that she had never been anyone's ornament, he replied, "Then you are exactly what I need." Standing in Silver Creek's dust with rotten egg hardening on her sleeve, Rose understood the trap hidden in those words. To a man like Cornelius, need meant usefulness, and usefulness ended the moment a thing announced itself as human. Alex's coat swallowed her to the wrists. It was heavy and honest. Pine smoke curled from its seams. She breathed, and the cold in her chest unknotted by a measure. "Last warning," Cornelius said. The edges of his smile sharpened for his audience. "Step away from my property." Alex returned his gaze without rise or flare. "She isn't property." "You signed for her?" A ranch hand called, aiming for a laugh and earning one. "Receipts in his vest pocket." Alex moved his eyes to the speaker, and the man looked suddenly interested in his boots. A quiet settled, thin at first, then firm, as if the whole town had realized the line it was towing. Alex used the quiet like a craftsman uses a level. "You broke a promise to this woman," he said to Cornelius. "You did it in front of your neighbors so they'd hold the shame if you ever bothered to feel it. Now you'll make it right." "And how?" Cornelius said, the word oiled with contempt. "Does a mountain creature propose I do that?" "Pay her fare," Alex said. "Home or elsewhere if she chooses. Pay for a room, a bath, new clothes, and the trunk you told her not to bring because there would be a wardrobe waiting. Then you'll pay whoever scrubbed the square after your entertainment." Laughter flickered, quickly smothered. It carried too much truth to be safe. Cornelius's jaw buttoned. "I owe her nothing." Alex reached behind him, unbuckled the thong at his belt, and laid a leather poke on the hitch rail. The faint clatter of coin against coin turned heads up and down the street. "Then I'll settle your debt for you," he said, "and you'll sign a line that says you're finished with her in every way a man can claim. No stories later, no reach, no hireling sent to make trouble. You give me that, I'll give you what your pride is hungry for, an exit." "An exit?" Cornelius spat. "I need no exit." Alex shrugged once. "From the part where I break your men and make your lawyer poor." The quiet grew teeth. The sheriff, who had been pretending to study a poster in the shade of the Mercantile, looked away from the poster and at the money, and then at Cornelius's face, where calculation had replaced outrage. A practical man can smell a losing seam. "You can't buy a contract with cash and insolence," Cornelius said, but he had already begun to reach for the words he would use in the story he'd tell later at the hotel. A misunderstanding, a charitable settlement, a gentleman's preference for harmony. "You can write a release," the sheriff offered, like a man placing a plank over water he has no intention of walking into. "Witnessed proper, everybody goes home." Rose found her voice. "I don't have a home to go to." It came out plain, unadorned, and the square received it in the way a church receives a hymn, when the singer's hands are still wet from dishwater. No argument, just the truth, set down in air. Alex did not look at her. He kept his attention on the only dangerous thing in the yard, but his answer was immediate, clipped to certainty. Then she'll choose where to start one. Something gave way in Cornelius. Maybe it was arithmetic. 30 wages lost to bruises, a jury unimpressed by theatrical cruelty, the knowledge that the only thing more enduring than money is the town's memory of how you spent it. Maybe it was the intensity of a stranger's refusal to play by his rules. He signaled a clerk from the hotel. Paper arrived, an inkstand, a silver pen that liked to be admired. Cornelius wrote. He wrote his way out from under a mess he'd made, like a spider that trusts its thread more than gravity. The sheriff and 2 merchants witnessed. Alex counted coin into the clerk's careful hands, the bath, the room, the dress, the train if she wanted it, double for the scrub boys, and palmed the receipt without glancing down. "Take your trash off my street," Cornelius muttered, too low for anyone but Alex to hear, which meant he had chosen a different audience for his courage, the one inside his skull. Alex's mouth did not move. "You first." He gathered the papers, slid them into an inner pocket, then turned at last to Rose. He didn't ask if she could stand. She had been standing the whole time. He didn't ask if she wished to leave. He had already given her the shape of leaving that didn't taste like defeat. "We'll see you settled," he said. "Hot water, food, rest, then you decide your road." Her throat worked around a thank you she didn't trust to hold together, so she nodded instead. The crowd parted more gently now. A woman stepped out from the dressmaker's and pressed a folded chemise into Rose's hands without a word. A boy who had giggled earlier ran ahead to swing the hotel door wide. Alex did not touch Rose as they walked. He carried presents like other men carry rifles, and it was enough. Men whose laughter had been easiest now found other errands to do, and Silver Creek remembered that it preferred decency when decency didn't cost. At the threshold, Rose paused. In the beveled glass, she caught a ghost of herself, hair undone, cheeks flushed with humiliation, and something else, something like stubborn life. Behind her, Alex's reflection watched the street, unblinking. "I was not beautiful to them," she said softly. Alex answered without turning. "They were not brave enough to look." The clerk ushered her toward the stairs. Alex remained in the lobby a moment longer, methodically untying the grisly coat from her shoulders to keep the wet from chilling her in the steam. The weight left her with a hush she hadn't felt since Boston, the hush of being cared for without being claimed. Upstairs, the bath hissed, and the hard day began to soften around its edges. Downstairs, Cornelius gathered what pride he could and left the square by a side street. By nightfall, no one in Silver Creek could agree on when exactly the laughter had died, only that it had, and that the sound which replaced it was easier to live with. The storm arrived before dawn. Silver Creek's streets were a river of red mud when Alex knocked on the hotel door to collect her. Rose stood in the hall, wearing a plain gray dress the seamstress had lent her. Her hair, still damp from washing, fell loose around her shoulders. Her cheeks were pale but clean, her eyes dark with sleeplessness. She clutched a small parcel. Everything she owned now fit inside a scrap of cloth tied with twine. Alex nodded once. "You ready?" She hesitated. "To go where?" "Out of this town," he said simply. "You decide what comes after." He didn't reach for her arm, didn't hurry her. He turned and walked toward the livery, and she followed. The stable smelled of hay and smoke. His horse waited, an enormous black stallion with a white blaze and eyes that looked almost human. When Alex saddled it, the leather creaked like old thunder. Rose stood beside him, watching his hands. They were big, scarred, but gentle in motion. He tied her parcel behind the saddle, then turned to her. "You can ride?" She gave a small laugh. "Not well." "Then you'll ride with me." Before she could protest, he lifted her, effortlessly like a child, and settled her on the saddle. When he climbed up behind her, she felt the warmth of him, solid as the mountain itself. The first light of morning bled over the peaks as they left town. No one stopped them. No one even looked. They rode in silence for hours, up through winding trails and pine-shadowed passes where snow lingered in crevices. The higher they climbed, the quieter the world became. Only the steady rhythm of hooves and the far-off cry of an eagle broke the stillness. Rose's thoughts churned. She should have been afraid, alone with a stranger in the wilderness. But every time she glanced back and saw his profile against the pale sky, the fear faded. He did not stare. He did not speak unless necessary. He simply was, a presence that made the world seem survivable again. Finally, at a narrow ridge overlooking a valley of fir trees, Alex halted the horse. He pointed. "Down there, my place." Far below, smoke rose from a cabin tucked beside a silver stream. A line of aspens, gold against the dark pines, glimmered in the morning sun. "It's beautiful," Rose breathed. "It's quiet," he said. "That's better." They started down the slope. The path was steep and slick with melting snow. Twice Rose slipped, and twice Alex's arm came around her, steadying her without a word. When they reached the bottom, he tied the horse and led her to a wooden bridge over the creek. The boards were slick. She hesitated. Alex stepped beside her and offered his hand. His palm was rough, warm. She placed her smaller hand in his and crossed. Inside the valley, everything smelled of pine and smoke and clean water. Birds darted between branches. Somewhere a stream murmured beneath ice. Alex stopped at a small clearing and turned to her. "You can rest here a while. I'll get a fire going." He built it quickly, dry wood, kindling, a spark from his flint. Within minutes, flames danced high, and the warmth soaked into her bones. He handed her a tin cup. Coffee. She took it carefully, the heat almost too much for her fingers. "Thank you." Alex sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "You'll need food soon. I've got venison jerky and bread in the saddlebag. Not much, but it'll do." "You don't have to." He looked up, cutting her words short. "I didn't bring you out here to owe me anything. Eat." His tone was firm, but his eyes, those glacier blue eyes, were gentle. She nodded and took the food. It was tough and salty, but she ate until her stomach stopped twisting. They stayed by the fire for a while. The wind softened. A hawk wheeled high above them, and the sun began to sink behind the ridge. Rose broke the silence. "Why did you help me?" Alex didn't answer right away. He poked the fire, watching sparks rise. "Because no one else did." "That's all?" He shrugged. "Sometimes that's enough." She studied him, the quiet strength, the stillness that seemed both burden and blessing. "You live alone up there?" "Yes." "Why?" Alex's jaw tightened. "People talk too much. Mountains don't." Something in his voice warned her not to press, but curiosity tugged at her. "Don't you ever get lonely?" He met her eyes across the fire. Not until today. The words hung between them, heavy and soft, all at once. They reached the cabin by dusk. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of wood fire drifted through the trees. The cabin was built from thick pine logs, sturdy but worn smooth by years of care. Inside, it was warm. A table, a single chair, shelves lined with jars and tools, a narrow bed tucked against the wall. Everything neat, everything used. Alex lit a lantern and set it on the table. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't." He cut her off gently. "You need rest. That's not a request." Rose stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with her hands. The warmth, the quiet, the smell of pine sap. It felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's dream. Alex poured her another cup of coffee, then crouched to stoke the fire. The light carved his face in gold and shadow. "You can stay until you decide your road," he said. "No one will find you here, not unless you want them to." She swallowed hard. "Why are you so kind to me?" He didn't look up. "Kind?" he said. "No, just decent. The world could use more of that." Rose looked at him for a long moment. This giant of a man, scarred by something she didn't yet understand, offering her shelter with nothing asked in return. She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion pulling at her. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Thank you." Alex only nodded, staring into the fire as the light flickered across his eyes. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, carrying away the echoes of Silver Creek, the laughter, the cruelty, the shame, and left only the quiet heartbeat of the mountain. The mountain decided who stayed. Those who came only for the view left by the first storm. Those who stayed learned to live by its rules. Wake early, work hard, and keep the fire alive long after sunset. Within a week, Rose had begun to learn them all. Each morning, Alex was already outside when she woke. She would find the hearth stacked with kindling and a note scratched on bark. Gone trapping. Eat. It was not romance, but it was care, and that distinction mattered more than flowers. She cleaned because order steadied her. She cooked because she could. When he returned near dusk, smelling of pine and snow, she had stew waiting. The first time she set a bowl before him, she said, "It isn't much." He tasted, swallowed, and said, "It's good." That was all. But later she caught him going back for a second helping, and she smiled into the shadows so he would not see. Days slipped into a rhythm. They worked in near silence, their words simple and practical. Alex showed her how to patch the roof with resin, how to split kindling without splintering the grain, how to read the sky for weather. He moved with a deliberate grace, no wasted motion, no noise. The forest seemed to breathe with him. One afternoon, he caught her struggling with a bucket at the creek. "You'll freeze your hands off that way," he said, and before she could protest, he rolled his sleeves and knelt beside her. He dipped his bare hands into the icy water and filled the bucket in 2 swift movements. The veins on his forearms stood like roots beneath bark. "You make it look easy," she said. "It isn't," he replied. "You just get used to what hurts." She looked up, startled by the quiet confession hidden in his tone, but he had already turned back toward the cabin. That night, while he worked at the table mending a trap, she asked softly, "Does it ever stop hurting?" Alex didn't look up. "No, but you learn to carry it better." By the 3rd week, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the absence of words, but a kind of shared peace. They spoke when it mattered, and when it didn't, the wind or the fire did the talking for them. Rose began humming while she cooked, simple tunes from her childhood, hymns her mother used to sing over laundry. At first, Alex only listened. Then one night, he surprised her. "You have a good voice," he said. She laughed softly. "For church basements, maybe?" "For anywhere," he said, and went back to carving the handle of a new ladle. His compliment hung in the air like the faint scent of pine resin, unexpected and strangely comforting. The cabin changed under her hands. Curtains appeared, stitched from old flour sacks. Flowers, tiny blue alpine blooms she'd gathered by the stream, stood in a clay jar on the table. Alex said nothing, but the next day, when he came back from hunting, he had built her a shelf for books she didn't yet own. "You didn't have to," he cut her off gently. Cabin looked lopsided without it. She laughed, and for the first time since Boston, the sound didn't feel like an apology. Winter deepened. Snow built up against the cabin walls until it muffled every sound. Some nights, the wind howled like an animal at the door. During one storm, the shutters rattled loose, and Alex rose from his bedroll by the fire to hammer them back in place. When he returned, soaked and steaming, she was waiting with a blanket. "You'll catch your death," she scolded. He blinked at her through wet lashes. "Haven't caught it yet." "Sit," she ordered, surprising both of them. He sat. She wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, her hands brushing the heat of his skin. Beneath the coarse fabric, muscle and scar were woven together like story and silence. When she stepped back, his voice was low. "No one's done that in a long time." "What?" "Worried." She looked down, cheeks burning. "Someone should." Alex studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if agreeing with something older than words. Weeks blurred. They built traps together, checked lines, gathered kindling. She learned to ride his great black horse, clumsy at first, then steady. She laughed the day she finally stayed in the saddle through a full gallop, and Alex, watching, found himself smiling without meaning to. One evening, as they ate by lamplight, she said, "I thought I'd feel lonely out here." "You don't?" "Not anymore." Alex's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He looked at her across the table, the firelight painting her face gold. "Good," he said finally, and the word carried more warmth than any embrace. Yet there were moments he disappeared into himself. Sometimes at dusk, when the sky turned violet and the world went still, she would find him outside, staring toward the ridge where two pine trees stood close together like sentinels. His face then was unreadable, part grief, part reverence. She didn't ask. She only brought him coffee, placed it beside him, and went back inside. One night, she woke to find him gone. She followed the faint glow of his lantern through the snow to a small rise behind the cabin. Two simple stones stood there, half buried. The air around them felt sacred. Alex turned when he heard her. "Couldn't sleep?" "Neither could you," she said gently. He looked down at the stones. "My wife and our boy." Rose's breath caught, but she said nothing. The silence was enough. After a while he added, "The cabin used to have another voice in it, laughter. I built the walls to keep the wind out, but they kept her voice in. Some days that's harder." Rose moved closer, her boots sinking into the snow beside his. "Then let it out," she said. "Let the wind carry it." He looked at her, really looked, as though he'd never expected anyone to understand that kind of pain. For a heartbeat, he seemed about to reach for her hand, but instead he exhaled, and the cloud of his breath drifted upward like a small release. When spring began to whisper through the pines, the cabin no longer felt like a refuge for one. It had become a home for two wounded souls learning how to stand beside each other without breaking. One afternoon, Rose stood at the window while Alex split wood outside. The swing of the axe was steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. She realized she was humming again, not out of habit, but out of contentment. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to make herself smaller. She wasn't apologizing for the space she occupied or the air she breathed. The mountain didn't care about her shape or her scars, and neither, she realized, did he. When Alex came in that night, tracking snow and sawdust, she met him with a smile that needed no explanation. He paused, studying her as if memorizing the sight, then set the wood down and said quietly, "The mountain chose right when it sent you here." And for the first time, she believed it too. The thaw came late that year, slow and stubborn. The river cracked its icy shell piece by piece, and green returned hesitantly to the valley. Rose welcomed the change with restless energy, cleaning, mending, planting herbs along the cabin's edge. But Alex grew quieter. The warmth that melted snow seemed to harden something in him instead. At night, she sometimes woke to find him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with eyes that saw a different time. She'd learned not to disturb him. Grief was a guest that visited on its own schedule. One morning, as she swept the porch, a shadow fell across the yard. Rose looked up. A rider coming fast along the ridge road. Her heart stuttered. Visitors were rare up here. Alex stepped out from the barn, rifle already in his hands. "Stay inside," he said, his voice low but steady. She obeyed. The rider dismounted at the gate, a man in a dust-stained coat, his face sharp with arrogance. "Alexander Volkov?" he called. Alex didn't answer. He simply waited. The man produced a letter sealed with wax. "From Silver Creek, I was told to deliver this to you." Alex took it, but his gaze stayed on the messenger. "Who told you?" "Cornelius Vandermeer," the man said, smiling faintly. "He says to tell you he's recovered, and he doesn't forget." Alex's jaw tightened. "Tell him I don't either." The man's smile faltered. "You'll regret—" He didn't finish. Alex's hand flicked up, and the rifle barrel tilted just enough to silence any further bravado. The messenger paled, swung into the saddle, and rode off fast down the trail. Rose stepped onto the porch as the hoofbeats faded. "It's him, isn't it?" Alex nodded, turning the letter over in his hands but not breaking the seal. "He's stirring the mud. Men like him can't stand losing face." "What will he do?" "What men like that always do," Alex said quietly. "Send someone else to bleed for their pride." He tucked the letter into his coat and met her eyes. "Don't be afraid." "I'm not," she said, surprising herself with how true it sounded. That evening, he finally opened the letter. Rose watched from the table, the lamplight throwing long shadows across the wood. Alex read silently, then folded it once and tossed it into the fire. "What did it say?" she asked. He hesitated. "He's coming, not alone." Rose swallowed. "Why?" "To take back what he thinks he owns." His tone was flat, but the muscle in his jaw worked like stone under pressure. She rose and went to him. I'm not something to be owned, Alex. I know that. His voice softened, but worry flickered behind his eyes. He doesn't. He turned away, began checking his rifle, movements precise, mechanical. I can handle him. I don't doubt that, she said, but if he brings others, then I handle them too. Rose touched his arm. You can't fight the whole world for me. He looked down at her hand, resting small and pale against his sleeve. I already did once. 2 days later, the first sign came. Smoke in the distance far down the trail. Alex stood at the ridge with his field glasses. 3 wagons, at least a dozen riders. They'll reach the valley by nightfall. Rose joined him. Can we leave? He shook his head. They'd track us. The snowmelt slows travel. We make our stand here. She nodded, trying to still the tremor in her voice. Then tell me what to do. He turned to her fully then, studying her face, the steadiness in her eyes, the courage beneath the fear. You load ammunition. Keep the lamp low. If anything happens, don't, she interrupted fierce. Don't tell me to run. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Alex gave a small nod. All right. They worked together in grim efficiency. She filled cartridges. He reinforced the shutters, stacked wood for barricades, set traps along the narrow trail leading to the cabin. When the light faded, he poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her by the fire. You're brave, he said quietly. No, she said. I'm tired of being afraid. He looked at her then, truly looked, at the curve of her shoulders, the strength she no longer hid, the defiance in her chin. You remind me of her sometimes. Your wife, she said gently. Alex nodded. Katerina never backed down either. Rose reached out and took his hand. Then I'm honored. He squeezed her fingers once, then released them. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be loud. The night came heavy with fog. The forest went silent, as if holding its breath. Rose lay awake, listening to every creak and whisper. Near dawn, the first hoofbeats echoed down the pass. Alex was already up, rifle in hand. They're here. Through the narrow window, torchlight flickered in the trees. 20, maybe more. Cornelius rode at the front, face half shadowed under his hat. Volkov, his voice rang out. You took what's mine. I've come to take her back. Alex stepped outside, unarmed at first, his height turning the small clearing into a stage. You've come a long way for another beating. Cornelius sneered. This time I didn't come alone. The riders spread out in a semicircle, rifles glinting in the pale light. Rose watched from inside, heart pounding. Alex spoke evenly. You can still turn back. Not a chance, Cornelius spat. Hand her over, and maybe I'll let you live. Alex moved his head just enough to meet Rose's eyes through the window. Then, slowly, he reached for his rifle. The first shot cracked the silence. The fight was brutal and short. Alex moved like the storm he'd been named for, silent, merciless, precise. 2 men fell before the others realized what they'd started. The rest broke formation, firing blindly into the smoke as the mountain echoed with gunfire. Rose reloaded from inside, hands shaking, lips moving in prayer. When a man tried to circle toward the back, she saw him through the window, raised the revolver Alex had taught her to use, and fired. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but the man dropped. Her breath came fast, half shock, half awe. Outside, Alex roared something in Russian, a sound that froze blood and sent 3 men galloping for the trees. The remaining few fought on until Cornelius, bleeding from a shoulder wound, shouted for retreat. They vanished down the trail, dragging their wounded. When the smoke cleared, Alex stood in the snow, chest heaving, face streaked with ash. Rose ran to him. "You're hurt!" He looked down at the shallow graze on his arm. "Not much." "You scared me," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. He reached out, wiped one away with his thumb. "You were brave." She gave a small, breathless laugh. "You taught me." Alex's gaze softened. "You didn't need teaching, Rose, just reminding." They buried the fallen strangers at the edge of the clearing. Alex said no words over them, just stood in silence, hat in hand, as the wind carried the last of the smoke away. When he turned back toward the cabin, Rose was waiting on the porch, her face pale but steady. "It's over," she said, "for now." "Then what happens next?" Alex looked at her. The woman who had come to him broken and now stood unflinching in the light. "We live," he said simply, "one day at a time." The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The forest, usually alive with birds and wind, seemed to hold its breath. Alex moved through it like a shadow, checking the perimeter, resetting traps, watching the trail. Rose could tell he didn't believe it was over. Men like Cornelius didn't accept defeat. They brooded, planned, and struck when pride demanded it. One morning, Alex returned from the ridge later than usual. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "They're coming again," he said. "More of them. At least 40 this time." Rose froze where she stood, flour still on her hands from kneading dough. 40? He nodded once. "He's hired guns from Cheyenne, paid them to finish what he couldn't." Her pulse quickened, but she stepped closer. "Then we fight again." Alex's expression darkened. "No, this time you run." "No." "Rose," his voice was firm, the one that could still a storm, "I can hold them off long enough for you to reach the North Pass. There's a trapper there, McKinley. He'll help you." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You think I could live knowing I left you here? You think I'd survive a day with that?" His shoulders sagged, the mountain inside him softening. "You shouldn't have to fight my war." She took his hand. "It's not your war anymore. It's ours." By dusk, they were ready. Alex fortified the cabin, flipped the table against the window, stacked barrels and crates along the walls. Rose reloaded ammunition with trembling precision. When the first flicker of torchlight appeared between the trees, she felt her stomach twist, but didn't falter. Cornelius's voice rang out again, echoing against the cliffs. "Volkov, I gave you a chance to crawl away. Now I'll bury you where you stand." Alex stepped to the doorway. "Then come do it." The first volley shattered the silence, gunfire ripping through the dark. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Rose ducked behind the table, heart pounding. Alex fired back through the window, a slow, steady rhythm, each shot deliberate. For hours, the mountain burned with noise. Flames caught the outer fence, smoke coiling into the night. Alex fought like a man possessed, no fear, no hesitation, only grim purpose. Rose stayed low, reloading, handing him cartridges, praying with every breath. When a bullet grazed his shoulder, she screamed, but he only grunted, fired again. "Stay down," he ordered. "I'm not leaving you." "You already said that," he growled, eyes blazing with something between fury and awe. The battle turned when the wind shifted, driving the smoke back toward the attackers. Alex used it like a weapon, slipping out the back door, silent as a ghost. Rose watched from the window as shapes moved through the fog. Men shouting, confused. Then the shouting stopped, one voice at a time. When the smoke cleared, Cornelius stood alone at the edge of the clearing, his fine coat torn, face streaked with soot. He raised his gun, hands shaking. "You ruined me, Volkov. You took everything." Alex stepped into view, rifle lowered. "You ruined yourself." Cornelius aimed, finger trembling on the trigger. "She's mine." Before Alex could move, a shot rang out. Cornelius's eyes went wide, not from Alex's rifle, but from the revolver smoking in Rose's hands. She stood on the porch, breath heavy, arms steady. "I was never yours." Cornelius dropped to his knees, disbelief twisting his face before he collapsed into the dirt. Alex turned, stunned. "Rose." Her voice broke. "He would have killed you." He crossed the clearing in 2 strides, caught her in his arms. "He'll never touch anyone again," he murmured against her hair. "It's done." The silence that followed was immense. No gunfire, no shouting, only the slow crackle of embers and the whisper of wind through pine. By dawn the smoke had thinned, and the valley was quiet again. The cabin stood scorched, but still strong, like them. Alex's hands were black with soot when he reached for her. "It's over, Rose. You're safe now." She looked up at him, tears glittering in her eyes. "We're safe." He nodded, his voice rough. "We're safe." And for the first time since the day she arrived in Silver Creek, she believed him. The fire smoldered through the morning, leaving behind only gray smoke and silence. The snow around the cabin was blackened with ash, the air heavy with the scent of gunpowder and pine. But within those scorched walls, life remained, fragile, trembling, but alive. Rose sat by the hearth, bandaging Alex's arm with steady hands. His skin was rough beneath her fingers, his breath slow and even. He should have looked frightening, bloodied, burned, massive. But all she saw was the man who had stood between her and the world's cruelty. When she tied the last knot, he caught her wrist gently. "You saved me," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "No, we saved each other." For a moment, neither spoke. The crackling fire filled the silence, the sound of survival. Days passed, and the mountain began to heal. Snow melted into clear rivulets that shimmered through the valley. Birds returned, timid at first, then bold. Life crept back the way forgiveness does, slow, patient, almost shy. Alex repaired the cabin plank by plank. Rose planted new herbs where the ground had burned. At night, they sat by the fire, too tired to speak, but too grateful to sleep. Once, while mending a window frame, Alex looked over at her and said softly, "You could leave now. You've earned your freedom 12 times over." Rose smiled, setting down her needle. "You still don't get it, do you?" He frowned slightly. "Get what?" "That I was free the moment you looked at me like I was human." The words landed between them like a vow. Alex reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, a touch both reverent and uncertain, like a man learning sunlight again after too long in the dark. "Then stay," he murmured. "I already have," she whispered. That evening, they shared a quiet meal, laughter flickering between them like sparks. The wounds on Alex's arm were healing. The fear in Rose's heart had become something gentler, a steady faith in the man beside her and the life they were building from ruin. Outside, the stars blinked awake over the ridges. Rose stepped to the door, pulling the bearskin cloak tighter around her shoulders. "It's beautiful up here," she said. "It almost feels holy." Alex joined her, resting one massive hand on the doorframe. "It is," he said, "not because it's perfect, because it forgives." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had once sounded like thunder and now like peace. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, steady, patient, eternal. The mountain, at last, had two souls that belonged to it. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with flowers or music. Sometimes it rides out of the forest, bleeding and breathless, but determined to stand between you and the world that hurt you. Alex and Rose didn't save each other with beauty or perfection. They did it with courage, forgiveness, and the quiet promise to stay. If you've ever felt unwanted, too much, or not enough, remember this: the right heart will never measure your worth by your shape or your scars. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Because maybe you still believe in love that heals.